Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We're going to talk about employment today. You go to work for a company, you are either working as a salaried employee or an hourly employee. Now when you're salaried, that means that your job is, and the completion of your job is what your salary pays for, and there's not much attention paid to exactly how many hours you're working. Well, that is changing with new federal regulations that are tightening the overtime requirements for salaried employees. Well, those of us in the private sector have a little more leeway than those in the public sector, and this is potentially going to have a big impact on counties. That's the topic of our show today, and we're going to start with a little background about the new regulations by tossing it over to Cameron Porter.
Working overtime. If you're on salary, you probably feel a little bit differently about that than if you work hourly. But for 36,000 Utahns and 4 million Americans, that may be about to change starting December 1st of this year. The Department of Labor has finalized a new rule affecting salaried employees working overtime that's making waves through county governments.
The overtime rule will affect specifically salaried employees who earn $47,000 or below. Previously, the law did not apply to salaried employees who worked and earned $23,000 or above. It will take effect December 1st, 2016, and it allows those employees to be paid overtime for work that they perform over 40 hours per week. The Department of Labor has an estimate of how many people nationwide and statewide will be affected by the rule change. It's 36,000 that they estimate will be affected by the rule change in Utah, 4.2 million nationwide.
So the rule is intended to protect employees from being exploited by their employers. But will the rule actually be effective in preventing employees from being overworked and underpaid?
In my opinion, the rule is being put in place to protect salaried employees from being required to work by the employer above and beyond 40 hours per week without being paid overtime at an overtime rate. I believe it was written and will be enforced to protect salaried employees that are not being paid appropriately based on the hours that they put in a given work week.
The criticism of the rule has little to do with whether it will actually solve the problems it sets out to solve, and everything to do with the effect it's going to have on upstanding corporations and even county governments.
Employees that find themselves under the new threshold complain that they'll be locked into a more rigid work schedule than before. If, for example, they want to take a day off one week, they will no longer have the flexibility of working longer the week before in order to not fall behind or rely on PTO. In addition, voluntarily working longer hours is one way an employee can distinguish him or herself from coworkers and earn raises and promotions. While some salary jobs are already structured fairly rigidly in a 9-to-5 environment, many salary jobs are salary precisely because the number of hours needing to be worked varies from week to week. This new overtime rule may solve the problem of the small percentage of cases where the employee is being exploited, but it creates a host of new issues for the huge amount of small businesses and county governments that have healthy relationships with their employees. The National Association of Counties has issued a statement on the rule that says, under the rule, counties' ability to provide public services, from transportation to health to public safety and emergency services, could be compromised.
Exactly how will it make daily operations for our counties more difficult? We'll cover that and more when we join our guest panel. For the County Seat, I'm Cameron Porter.
Thank you, Cameron. Now we have a good idea of what the regulations are. We'll find out how they're going to affect the counties when we come back on the County Seat.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
place that is beyond words. There is nothing to be said, except take your time in Bryce Canyon country.
Unlimited opportunity for adventure. It's all about knowing where to look. ATV adventures, rock crawling events, art festivals, and wildlife events. The opportunities are limitless. Pick your adventure in Millard County.
ATV? Check. Four-wheel driving? Check. Bouldering? Check. Mountain biking? Check. Hiking? Check. River rafting? Check. Adventure is about more than just crossing activities off of a list, but hey, if you can find a place that gives you everything you're looking for, all the better. In Emery County, you'll find the San Rafael swell, trails, lakes, and the small-town hospitality you're looking for. San Rafael Country, in the heart of Utah. Visit us and check something off your list.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about new federal rules that affect overtime and the impact it has on county government. Joining us for a conversation, Leslie Bishop, HR Director of Iron County, who drove all the way up today. Thank you for making the drive. She also, I might point out, her daughter's in the audience watching the program from the studio. We also have with us Brandy Grace, who is the Personnel Services Director of the Utah Association of Counties. Brandy, that takes up the whole line on the bottom of the screen. And you also are the former clerk auditor from Millard County.
That's right.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so Cameron has explained exactly how these new, what these new regulations are about. I'd like to try and explore a case study of how that might affect a county on the ground. Do you have any examples of, that we could look at on that?
The first step that counties need to take is looking at their exempt positions and determining if they are under the new threshold. As I'm sure you've discussed, the threshold has more than doubled, and so that's a significant change. So counties need to look at those non-exempt positions. First of all, determine if they're under that threshold, and then determine the course of action to take. Counties have a few choices. One is bringing that salary, the basic salary, up to the minimum threshold now. They could reduce the number of hours so that employees are not working more than the 40 hours, or they can evaluate the workload and determine where to shift the workload so that those employees are not working that additional time.
What kind of a financial impact would one of those choices make on a county?
When you're evaluating a certain position, especially for us, the mid-management positions, when I say that, you're looking at like center directors, they're kind of sitting on that threshold. You're either going to have to increase to match the exemption, the new requirement, which would be several thousands of dollars.
Per employee per year?
It could be. Mm-hmm. And then you have the benefit impact on top, because benefits are tagged to the base salary that you're paying, so that's an additional, and for some cases that could be another 38% depending on retirement. So you could look at several thousand to $10,000 depending on the position that you're looking at. And that's a commitment. You can't reduce those salaries going forward. That's a commitment ongoing as you make changes in county budgets.
So just change the county budget.
That's the challenge.
Maybe this is part the federal government doesn't understand in this regulation?
Counties have limited budgets, and with this increase being so significant, it's not as simple as increasing the budget. That's not really an option that counties have. And so they need to look at alternatives to be able to fund these increases or shift the workload.
Well, Leslie, from your standpoint, what do you think, I mean, you know what the new regulations are. Your county's in the middle of reviewing this. What do you think you're going to have to do to make this all fit? Because you have this constraint of, I mean, if I'm in the corporate world, I can just go out and raise prices on my product to cover this new cost, pass it on to the consumer. You don't have that ability because that's taxes, and you have to go through a very lengthy process to raise taxes. So what are your options?
Well, taxes probably are not an option because it's not a popular option. Reducing services, because as you reduce workload, there might not be the options to provide some of those services that people wish to have, or maybe the availability of those services. The other option is to reduce employee benefits to balance the salary need. As everyone knows, public employees do have most likely better benefit packages than the public or the private sector. And we have to look at balancing that. And that's one of the true outcomes, is maybe reducing those benefits to pay for the regulations or accommodate the regulations that have been thrust upon us.
You raise an interesting point. You say that your benefit packages sometimes can go up to, you know, I think you said 38%. My company, I run about 25, but I don't have retirement. Is there enough play in there that you think you can actually make that, you know, you can actually shave it and make it work?
The only, as far as retirement, no, because that's legislatively driven. We are bound by whatever the legislature decides for the Utah retirement system. So that one we have no choice. But as far as healthcare, that's where you're going to see the changes. Healthcare, long-term disability, those types of fringe benefits that we've, sick leave, vacation, those things would have to be taken into account.
Okay, we're going to take a quick pause. I have one more question on that, and then we'll move on to the next arena. You're watching The County Seat. We'll be right back in just a second.
When the road takes you farther than you knew possible, when the world is more beautiful than you've ever seen, when home is more comfortable than it should be, this is when you know you're in Kane County. The perfect mix of rural and urban, culture and adventure. Glendale, Orderville, Kanab, Big Water, small towns with more to offer than just peace and quiet. Kane County, Utah. Find the new you.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
What do you picture when you hear Rich County, Utah? Bear Lake adventure, snowmobile action, pristine skiing, spectacular solitude. Well, if that isn't what first came to mind, then you just don't know Rich County. The Bear Lake Monster Polar Plunge, snowmobiling Monte Cristo, ice fishing Bear Lake, skiing the backcountry, fishing at the Cisco Disco. Come and find out what you never knew you were missing. Rich County, Utah. The weekends just never feel like they're long enough. By the time you get to a destination, you're worn out and you may need a vacation to recover from your last vacation. The solution is closer than you think, and that's just what you need. You can find the desert at Little Sahara, the cool refreshment of Yuba Lake, escape to the green of the forest on the Nebo Loop. Make your escape to Juab County. It'll change your family forever.
Welcome back to The County Seat. We're talking today about overtime for county employees and how that landscape is in the process of changing. We left off with talking about under the restrictions of raising taxes and meeting these new requirements that you may have to either reduce services or reduce benefits to the employees. And you mentioned health care. And my question is, don't you already have a whole new set of mandates that just took place a few years ago with the ACA? You really can't back out of health care, can you?
No, with the ACA in place, it's mandated that we provide a certain level of health care to our employees. And that comes at a great cost to counties. Traditionally, some counties will pay a full contribution for their employees, but now we're looking at maybe a cost share where the employee might have to put in a percentage out of their own check to help cover those costs as we have more mandates coming down from the federal government with overtime compliance. Because we just don't have the budgets and we don't have the ability to, as a private sector, to raise a price and pass it along to the consumer. Our consumer is the taxpayer.
So another area that I thought about as you were explaining this to me is that you're going to be faced at looking at raising the, you say like a service center manager up to the salary to get above that threshold, to have to pay overtime and keep them on a salary, and that means you have to cut services. You're still going to need the manager. So basically what you're doing is you're creating a more bureaucratic, top-heavy organization with less people actually providing the service, and that's being forced upon you by federal mandates, and it doesn't help improve the position of the county. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement. I do. I believe that it's forcing us to put more on those managers, less people on the bottom. And the balancing act is almost impossible when they keep coming out with different regulations without thinking ahead of how is this going to affect those that can't generate the revenue. We don't have the bill press that the federal government has. We can't just create the money.
Oh, that's very true. What other kinds of HR problems through federal regulation have you guys had to overcome, say, in the last decade?
Well, I think probably the biggest challenge is still the Affordable Care Act, as most counties are still trying to figure out how to comply with that. There's been, I think, probably one of the most significant challenges that I've heard about from counties to county is a lot of part-time employees who were working in excess of 30 hours a week but not quite meeting the 40-hour full-time status have been cut back on their hours, which I think has been a challenge not only for providing the services that the counties do, but also for those workers and their families, because they've been reduced on the number of hours that they've been able to work or that the counties are willing to allow them to work in order to not have another employee that would be eligible for the cost of health care, which is so significant to counties.
How were those people getting health care in the first place on a part-time? Was it like a spouse had health care, or?
I know at Millard County, a lot of our employees were, they had a spouse that had health care, and this was just, the other spouse working to provide a little supplemental income for the family living expenses, and now that's been reduced, and that's a challenge.
How's that impacted Iron County? I mean, you see that you're the front line. You're the one that gets the first reports.
It's impacted morale. As Brandy stated, it really impacts those families, and it seeps into your organization when you have to reduce those hours. It impacts your taxpayer base, putting right back into the economy. I think that the morale was probably our largest issue of not quite understanding why they had to take that brunt and that hit. And it was difficult to communicate that to employees, good employees that are there providing a service.
Have you seen or heard that the service level being provided, you're getting more complaints from citizens about the services, the quality of services the county's rendering in different areas based on this?
I don't know that I've heard that specifically. I think in general, county employees are hard workers, and they realize that we're a service-oriented organization, and they try to provide good service, so others pick up the slack. But I think mostly it's for the impact to those families and the challenges that they face by not having that additional income, but certainly reducing hours. I can give you a specific example with our recreation department at Millard County. When we had to cut back on some of the employees, we had to take a serious look at the number of hours that we could operate our swimming pool facility. And when we had to cut back the hours of operation, then the whole community suffers. They want that availability. They want to be able to visit our facilities, and we had to cut back the hours in order to be able to properly staff.
So there are probably some things that are happening that people aren't understanding why they're happening. They're just saying, oh, they used to keep the pool open, and lazy buggers, now they're just going home at 5 o'clock, and that's not really the issue.
Yeah.
So are there, this is kind of intriguing. We're now seeing that ACA has had a negative impact. This overtime is about to have a negative impact. What are some of the other challenges that you as an HR director are always juggling or monitoring that is a mandate pushed down, either from the state or the federal government?
Most likely just, I think the ACA has probably been, for all of us, the most difficult to manage. And that then implies it's not just, it's implementing it. And now you have to have somebody managing that and taking time to count and make these measurement periods. And so not just reducing people's hours, now you have to supply the information back and the reporting requirement from some of these, and the same thing with the overtime. We're going to have reporting requirements to make sure that we're in compliance. Who's going to do that? Who's going to fill that void?
So basically, if you're taking your county health department, you're having to cut back employees that provide the service so that you can hire more clerks to do the reporting that's required of the federal mandate. Is that a stretch for me to say that?
No, not at all. or someone else is going to have to absorb it into their job description, which usually ends up being HR or auditing or one of those divisions, because it is required reporting. And there's hefty fines if you don't track that, especially with the ACA.
Wow. My head is still swimming. Have there been changes in civil service regulations as far as merit employees in the last few years that have changed that, or has that been pretty stable?
There hasn't really been anything with civil service, but my experience is there's a new dynamic or work culture where it's pretty difficult to work through progressive discipline issues or to manage those issues. If you need to separate employees or if you need to work on those issues, we really have a difficult time processing through that because of the laws around civil service.
Help me understand separate. Okay, when you said help me separate employees, I saw you pulling their arms off.
No. Separate would be dismiss, or if they're not performing. Performance-based is kind of where we need to be driven. We want to pay people that are performing well in their jobs and doing what they want. Negligent retention is something you might hear, and that's retaining employees that are not performing to a level or that might be a detriment to keep aboard. And that's something that we're constantly always trying to be strategic about, and it's very costly if it goes to a higher level or to court, and those are becoming very time consuming, and so that requires more personnel to try and manage that. And most of us have partners in doing that, but does a cost to the county. When we have to make those decisions, we're usually in court defending our decisions.
Wow. It's head spinning. We are going to take a quick break here on the county seat. We're going to come back with our final thoughts on HR and overtime and all these other things that have come to light today. We're probably going to have to do another show. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the county seat.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
Beautiful scene, isn't it? The great wide spaces of the wild, wild west. Hi, I'm Chad Booth, host of At Your Leisure. I'm asking you to support the Blue Ribbon Coalition. Their efforts responsibly preserve access to our public lands. If it were not for the Blue Ribbon Coalition and their efforts, you may not have access to millions of acres of land across the West. This is America's playground, and if we don't do anything, we are going to lose it. Join, participate, and donate.
Have you ever wanted to recreate the world around you? Add some excitement, culture, adventure? Well, there's no need to remake the world when that perfect combination already exists. Just remember 4 words. Welcome to Weber County. In Ogden, you'll find everything you're looking for, from the top of Powder Mountain to the restaurants of our revitalized downtown. Ogden, Utah, mountain to metro and everything in between. Visit Ogden.com.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about overtime. A very interesting point hit me, and so I look at it from being a business owner as well as a broadcaster, that if I have a problem employee, it's not that difficult for me to put a couple of case things in the file and say, okay, you were warned about this, you were talked about this, and this didn't improve, and so therefore we're going to separate you, using your phrase now, and terminate your employment with us, and you're down the road. And I think people would logically, in the private sector, think that that's what you do in civil service. That's not the case.
It's not the case. We have a different set of standards. There's the Personal Management Act that a lot of counties are under. It's actually a statute, 1733, that requires us to have systems in place. There's a due process. It's quite lengthy. You have to give every opportunity to correct behavior, which I'm sure private sectors do, but it's quite lengthy process and very detail-oriented, and it's become difficult. I'm just in this legal world we live in. Everyone seems to want to go immediately to their cause of suit, of why they have been harmed in some way, rather than accepting accountability maybe for a performance issue. That's just my experience as of late in the changes in HR.
And so you end up with county services suffering long, I mean, how, an example, I mean, it takes me about a month to either correct behavior or dismiss somebody. How long would it take a county?
It really depends on the situation, a case-by-case basis, but we've had up to 6 to 18 months, depending on, because there's that due process, investigation, making sure that we have documentation. And it's difficult because you're managing so many different departments and trying to make sure that due diligence is owed to the employee according to law, and that you've met all those requirements to move forward. And even when you have met all those requirements, it seems to be that there usually is some case that will come back, finding out that you've been called to court or in a suit, and ultimately it costs the taxpayers.
Mm-hmm.
So, Brandy, based on your experience, if you could, not taking into account the two things we've kind of harped on in our half hour here, being the overtime and ACA, if you could wave a magic wand and fix anything in HR with counties, what would be that one wand wave that you would try to fix?
Any HR related issue. I think there's going to be mandates that are going to come down. That's just the way it is. There's some that affect HR and other issues. But I think the one thing where HR really could benefit from was being able to have good communication with our department supervisors and other elected officials to be able to help them to understand what we're more aware of because of the role that we play. And probably just bettering the communication there, having them understand better, and having a better working relationship between the HR directors and the other administrators that they work with.
I hear a UAC convention program developing.
We're working towards that.
Very good.
That is something we are working on.
Thank you both for joining us today. This has been an extremely valuable conversation. Remember, local government is where your life happens. Be part of the solution. Get involved. Share this with your friends, and we'll look for you next week on the County Seat. If you'd like to share this video with your friends, well, you do that right here. If you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, you do that over here. If you'd like to interact with us on the County Seat, that happens over here. If you want to watch the next episode of the County Seat, you can catch it Saturday night at 11 or Sunday morning at 8:30 on ABC4 Good for Utah.